meeting to order and recognize all those in the audience. It is Monday, May 1st, 2023 at 5:15 p.m. We're in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. We did not have the new board member orientation this evening. Please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay. We've had no public communication. Are there any conflicts of interest to declare that haven't been mentioned before? Any conflicts of interest? Any conflicts of interest? Moving on to the consent agenda. At any time, a board member can remove something from the consent agenda. Would you like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Would you like to remove anything from the consent agenda? Would you like to remove anything from the consent agenda? If not, is there a motion for the consent agenda? Motion by Aaron, is there a second? Second by Dan. We have a motion, a second for the consent agenda to approve it. Is there any discussion? If not, assuming a roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Moving on to our regular meeting, under we'll fix some technical issues there. And do you want to pull up the recognition for Gail to read? That's what she's trying to pull up. So under recognition, we're working on it. Okay. We would like to recognize McKenna Barnick. McKenna, if you'd please come forward, and when Gail gets this pulled up, she's going to read your recognition. Come right over here. And we have a certificate for you, too, that we'll get to you in the mail.
The Jamestown School Board would like to recognize McKenna Barnick for her outstanding achievement and drive to succeed. She will be graduating with an associate degree in science from Lake Region State College on May 12th, right before she graduates from Jamestown High School on May 28th. These were taken both in conjunction with the high school offerings, dual credit and AP, as well as through summer coursework. Even more uniquely, she paid for that coursework herself and ultimately saved around $30,000 in the process. McKenna is planning to attend the University of North Dakota, majoring in biology with the goal of becoming a pediatric gastroenterologist. Wonderful.
Congratulations, McKenna, and thank you for joining us tonight. Moving on in our agenda, we don't have anything under correspondence, nothing under reports. Board Education, Strategic Competency Health Insurance Report. Dan is a member of the Health Insurance Committee. Would you please share a report with us tonight?
You bet I will. First, a little context. Our health insurance plan is self-funded, and it's administered by a committee made up of employees and administrators and school board members, and assisted by a consulting company, Brown & Brown. And we meet monthly to go over the reports from the fund and assess kind of where we're at in terms of expenses and income coming in from it. It's funded by a combination of employee contributions and board funds, in addition to refunds and premiums paid, rebates paid back from pharmaceutical companies, et cetera. Plan expenses cover pharmacy, we cover medical, we have some administrative costs associated with this, as well as some agreements with Medallis. So we have an agreement with Medallis where they provide discounts to JPS members of this plan, and it's a really good working relationship. As far as our current state right now, our balances of that fund is right about $1.2 million. It's about where we were at this same time last year. That's about double what our current minimum balance that we have negotiated before cost sharing kicks in for with the employees and with the plan. So far we're maintaining a good balance here. As you recall, last year we did not make any plan changes, so this year was identical to what last year's plan was. We did see about a 5% reduction in enrollment this year versus last year. And we're also seeing claims a little bit higher than it was the previous year. You'll also note that last year it was a very unusual year in terms of the number of claims. So this was, we're kind of trending more towards a normal year. That said, even though our costs are higher, we're still running a fair bit under budget. So right now the plan is stable and in a good position. Looking at the future state, we did get some proposals. We are looking at what the plan changes are going to look like over the next year. We do have some proposals back. The projections right now are looking for potentially needing an increase in the premiums and the costs. So the committee's job in the next meetings will be to take a look at, what changes do we want to make to be beneficial both for the employees and for the board here. We do have some options as far as deciding what kind of premiums we want to pay for stop loss. And there's some other items for additional income in terms of additional rebates and more accurate billing. So we have a couple levers we can pull to manage that cost increased. And again, the committee will be meeting that over the next month to decide that. So that's all I have. I'll stand for questions.
Any questions from the board? Diane?
I know there was always a feeling that, we were going to have a year that would just, blow us out of the water. And I'm wondering about, on the committee itself, is there resistance to that idea that we're going to have to increase premiums in order to plan for that year that has not happened yet? But, could at any time.
Go ahead, Dan.
I guess I don't feel that. I think all the members of the committee are very well aware of the situation. They know they don't want to get into a situation where the cost sharing kicks in. It doesn't benefit anybody. So we're very careful about making sure we have adequate balance and so it never kicks into that.
And we also have stopgap insurance also, which is helpful. Dr. Leck, you have a comment?
One comment I was going to make, so very recently the committee did make pretty substantial change related to plan design, and that has resulted in this year looking, fiscally, we're in good shape. Last year represented, a very similar end of the year financial status, which resulted in no plan design change. So I think there was a cliff, and the team made some very significant change to plan design already. So I wouldn't foresee really sweeping change because I think the committee made some steps in that, pretty significant steps in that direction already, which have resulted in the last 2 years being, in a much, much better financial position.
Thank you, Dr. Leck. And I just like to add too, there's a lot of really active discussion that goes on and a good discussion, I think, at the committee meetings. And the makeup, as Dan described, is, made up of teachers and staff and board members and central office. So I think lots of different perspectives coming together. Those are really good questions. Do you have anything else to add, Dan? Or
I just wanted to mention that you've already reassured me because the committee is very, very aware, as Dan said right away. And they've already made these changes, and they're all moving towards a common goal, which I don't know if that was always true, and I'm just totally reassured, and I appreciate the feedback. Thank you.
Thank you, Diane. And Aaron?
Yeah, I just want to mention, based on my own personal experience, the partnership with Medallis is awesome. So I appreciate that. As far as the balance, the 1.2 million, is that where we want to be as a target, or do we want to be at something higher, or what's the strategic goal in terms of that balance that we want to try to maintain?
Right now, that seems to be where we hover around there, so it seems to be kind of a balance point with our current plan. I guess we haven't really discussed what the goal should be, but it's 2x what we have as a minimum. But
Yeah, I was just going to add, we have a floor. We don't have a ceiling. We have not been in a position in which we have to talk about a ceiling. We've had a few instances since moving to self-funded where we've had to be concerned about the floor. But as a reminder, the floor is where the trigger comes, where we have a user fee and the MOU and the negotiated agreement. So the district would pay a portion of that. The users would pay a portion of that as a user fee. And so that floor is extremely important to us. But I think the way the plan is managed, I'm not sure that we would have to have a discussion on what a ceiling might be, but a discussion around what a target might be in terms of ending fund balance could not hurt.
And as a reminder, with the help of our, several years ago now, that floor was lowered with the help of the consultants. It was a 6-month trend. Now we're at like two months trend. But that was with the help of the consultants. It also avoided a trigger as well. At the same time, we were making some plan design changes. But those changes that we made seemed to be really effective. So that was very good for the plan. It is really nice to see it over that $1 million mark, because it was below that for quite a while. So, Dan.
I will add it. Every meeting we do have, I take a look at the projections, at least I do. But I know we all kind of look at the projections and take a look at, okay, is this going to draw down too far, and use that to kind of inform whether we got too close to the margin or not. So it is a little bit forward-looking. We just don't have a target that we're trying to aim for. Yep.
One more.
Yeah, go ahead.
And maybe just another side comment. It was very forward-thinking to have consultants come in. I was a part of the Health Insurance Committee when we didn't have a consultant, and then after the consultant. And the ability to have somebody else, a third party, looking at our data, helping us analyze what we're seeing, dive a little bit deeper. I know that there are self-funded plans that don't have consultants, and I think you make decisions at a very surface level. We're able to dig a lot deeper, and I think the expense of having the consultant pays off in the long term. I think that's been a very wise move in that direction.
And I agree with that, especially right now we're having discussions on even different pharmaceuticals and those kinds of things. Those are things that the consultants spend a lot of time working numbers, and we appreciate Christy every month. She has to provide a bunch of very last-minute numbers to the consultants, as well as she creates a report for us as well. And so, and that information, because we want it very timely, comes in very last minute, and so she works very hard before those meetings to get the information to us. So we appreciate her work on that as well. So, any other questions? Any other comments? Thank you, Dan. And we'll keep the board updated on Dan will keep the board updated on changes that decisions that have been made with that as well. Superintendent's report, Dr. Luck.
So you have my written report. We'll have a number of items that I will dig a little bit deeper on here, but that are agenda items for you later. You do have the personnel updates. Just a suggestion as we look to be even more efficient in our meetings with resignations and hires. If the way I've structured the hires, for example, we include the fact that they should have a successful background check, appropriate licensure, salaries to be adjusted upon the completion of negotiations. But with the way I've organized it now, just for the sake of efficiency, I would recommend that you could just move approval of hire for that individual at that position with that salary, and the rest would be assumed, rather than making a very long motion that includes the background checks and all that. I think that's assumed in the way I've structured your agenda item. Moving into item 2 in my report, policy HEBA outlines governance procedures related to our comparative expenditure reports, our monthly reports. Just if you look at the policy, we have in the past moved approval for those monthly financial reports. By policy, it's information, I don't think it is wrong to approve. It shows that you have read them, but I don't think it's necessary. They are information. If the board would like, we can shift that. My recommendation is to shift that just to information rather than approval. That doesn't change anything other than procedure. Of course, the expectation is that we review those reports, ask questions about those reports, but it's just procedurally, I think you can move that simply to information. Later on in the agenda, we've had a really good discussion at our last meeting about central office position and shifting that from part-time to full-time and what that might look like. I've taken some time to reflect, really review on what I might be looking for, what we need across the district, and I shifted that whole thinking into what I'm calling a continuous improvement director, which would shift that 0.5 curriculum professional development director into full-time. I outlined in greater detail in the board memo, but just for the sake of this discussion, the primary functions of the position would be to really enhance what Mr. Hagelin has a lot of hands in now, but the details of which sometimes have to be spread out to others. But the primary functions would be to operationalize a cohesive vision for teaching and learning. So that includes a lot of things. Direct leadership in the adoption, planning, management of curriculum, and that includes resource, but also looking at the teaching and learning aspect. Professional learning, multi-tiered MTSS, multi-tiered system of supports, PLCs, professional learning communities, and any initiative within the district strategic plan that relates to teaching and learning. So that's oversight of instructional coaches, coordination, development of building level data reviews, leading various district committees, anything that relates to instruction, curriculum, and professional learning. Beyond that, the position would be responsible as the primary Cognia contact. That's our school improvement. So that includes leading the district school improvement committee, coordinating Cognia reviews, considering we have a 5-year review coming up next year. That's going to be a substantial portion of this individual's responsibility initially in the next year. I would say a lot of the planning, adoption, review of curriculum is going to be a significant responsibility for the person in the upcoming year. Beyond that, those primary functions, there's other shared functions, or what I'd consider shared functions with central office administrators. That could be in HR, that could be financial, that could be working with me, but that includes things like budgeting for curriculum, professional learning, budgeting for curriculum and professional learning, oversight and management of all the federal programs that we offer, and then grant writing as well. So some of these, of course, are going to be dependent on the final selection. Is when we hire an individual, if that position's approved, we would look at the skill sets of those that continue to be in central office and determine some of that based on that individual. The position that I'm recommending is a daily rate consistent with the high school assistant principal position, but it would be on a 230-day base contract, or what I would consider a 230-day base contract, because the position could have an opportunity to have, as new initiatives come along, that comes with additional expectations and work. And so I thought if we had a 230-day base contract, you could flex the additional 30 days, and the board could, on an annual basis, consider, well, should there be an extended contract? Maybe it's 10 days, maybe it's 30 days, maybe it's 5 days, whatever that might be. But a base would be 230 with the board's kind of option every year to extend that to a full-time 12-month position. But I think at the 230 level, that gives us a good place to start. And you wanted to point out, as I referenced in my report, I appreciate the board's guidance as we worked through getting to a good place in drilling down into what we feel like we need to prioritize. The feedback gave me some good guidance as I did that. The nursing agreement that's up for a recommended approval later, that's a consistent cost as it has been in the past. That did not see an increase from Central Valley Health. The support staff wage schedule, our finance committee met making a recommendation to increase that base to $1.25. So if we did that, that would mean that the increase on the schedule, because remember, that increase is to the base of $1.25. So that's not a flat increase, but with steps, years of experience, at that $1.25 range, that would mean that people would receive between $1.14 and $1.50 per hour, depending on where they fall on the scale. We wanted to be aggressive here, even though the cost is high at around $307,000, but we felt we needed to be aggressive to make sure that we could recruit and retain the people that we have. Retain the great people that we have on staff, but be able to recruit into those positions that have been hard to fill for us. So I feel like this and last year are really good steps in that direction. Wanted to recognize those staff that were involved in the federal title program monitoring. We had an on-site visit from the Department of Public Instruction related to federal title programs. So that entailed a review of records. They had staff visits with us at a district level, but that included fiscal, English learners, foster, homeless, McKinney-Vento, school-wide title, our Title I private school, Title II, Title IV for public and non-public, and then overall administration and compliance. They had a debrief with us, so that included 6 on-site people from DPI. They were very, very complimentary of the work that we have been doing since our last on-site visit. They were extremely happy with our record keeping. The growth specifically related to English learners, they were very, very pleased with to see. And the suggestions for improvement were, I feel, very reasonable. I don't want to say minor, but I think clerical in nature. It was how do you document a certain thing? Is there a date on this request? Those kinds of things are what we saw primarily. So what I would consider to be less critical suggestions for improvement. And if anybody would like to see that final report, they can certainly come by and take a look at that. A handful of things that they suggested for approval, no compliance concerns. That, like I said, the feedback was very, very positive. A lot of credit goes to Joe for organizing a lot of those documents. I know that Amy supported that as well. Christy did a lot of work on the financial side, as did others in the business office. So I can't say enough good things about the on-site monitoring. Moving into the capital projects plan. So later in the agenda, you'll have a capital projects plan that was reviewed and is being recommended for approval from the facilities committee. And I'll walk through those at this point, and then we can follow up with questions here or on that agenda item. But based on what our current specials are, I'm going to recommend that we could levy at 2.5 mils instead of 3. So a slight decrease in terms of that building fund commit, or that the commitment overall of what we'll be recommending. So a small decrease, but decrease is good. But that I do want to point out that we could get updated special assessments, and so that could increase. But that's what I'm projecting right now, is to be slightly down. And I'll just talk about what you would see tab by tab. If you want to follow along, you certainly could. But I know that that's a lot to look through. But part of the capital projects plan embeds the summer projects. So that's what I'll walk through in the summer projects. So in building repairs, there were some kitchen updates that were targeted for improvement at Washington, at the Jamestown High School. There are curtain partitions in Jerry Meyer Arena that have very little remaining life, and to be honest, they are eyesores. And we would like to make a change there to update those. The rest of the building fund budget is built into annual light items. We have block amounts of funding that are available for things like HVAC, flooring, building repairs. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, we have a few line item areas for those things that come up. So we don't budget specifically for each of them. They go into a bucket. So that's building repairs. In sites, we have had the green space at the middle school directly to the south of this building for about 18 years. They recommend for reconditioning every 5, and we've never reconditioned. Right now, that's sort of like getting tackled on carpet. and we need to make some changes there. So in reconditioning, they come out, they suck up all those, well, if there are any remaining of those rubber pellets, they spread them back out and they add new pellets. That hasn't been done, so that's something that we need to do, so we budgeted for that as well. I fear that it will be a safety hazard if we just continue to not recondition that space. The roofs is the largest cost. When Greenberg came in and gave that assessment, if you remember in our last capital projects plan for summer projects, we did not do any roofs during this last plan. We did do some fixing, which we have a budgeted amount for, those things that come up that we need to patch. But in terms of replacement, we didn't make any replacements. Their recommendation was sections A, B, and C at the high school roof being the neediest. That is the primary instructional wing. That is a very, very large portion of roof. It represents about half of the cost represented in the capital projects plan. So a pretty significant portion of the capital projects plan spent on that roof, that portion of the high school. In the ADA schedule, those are projected costs for bathroom updates. I feel like we have two sets of bathrooms that are in the most need for updates. They are in the primary bathrooms as you walk into Roosevelt Elementary, and then what I would consider to be the activities bathrooms outside of the Jamestown Middle School. If you just walk right out here and take a right, right outside of Thompson and take a right down the hallway heading east, those two bathrooms that very much in need of updates. And so that represents the ADA schedule. Of course, at that time, we would also expand to make sure that they are ADA accessible. The safety schedule represents another pretty significant change. As the board is aware, right now between, in all of our buildings, but CTC and the high school, those are locked at all times. And the high school to CTC has not represented locked doorways in the same capacity because of the transitions between the CTC and the high school. And we know we need to find a solution to that. So we've set aside dollars in this capital projects plan to address how either remodeling or additional technology can support a safer environment on that campus by ensuring locked doors at all times. So that could look a few different ways, and that's something that Mr. Gaylor and I have been discussing of how that could look, but we have budgeted to try to solve that problem. And along the same way that I outlined, we would have, there's buckets of dollars in the building repairs. There's also an added bucket of dollars for safety equipment upgrades throughout the district. So in the past, that has been part of Mr. Armitage's technology budget. We've shifted that into the building fund budget to ensure that there is a consistent amount of dollars in there every year, because we need to upgrade that safety equipment. We need to upgrade cameras, the quality of cameras, the amount of cameras, where they're located at. And again, our focus is just on maintaining safety to the best degree that we can. On May 15th, moving into the next item, on May 15th, I'll have a recommendation to the board for an increase to substitute teacher pay rate. We did a little study within the region. We are at $120 a day, and oftentimes, to be completely honest, our regional schools set their substitute teacher pay rate based on what we provide, because there's a longer distance to travel for many of the subs who are oftentimes living here in Jamestown, and so they try to be competitive by basing what we set our substitute teacher pay rate at, but we're $120 a day. Within the region, they range from 130 to 160. So for us to be competitive, I feel like we need to make a shift, and that's about $15,000, a little bit more actually, per $10 if you extrapolate that based on the average over the last 2 years of substitute usage. So there's a fairly significant cost there, but we need to make sure that we are able to bring in the substitutes when we need them. We really see how impactful lack of subs is And we want to make sure that pay isn't the reason if we struggle for subs. So that would be coming on the 15th for the future. And we've had some good discussions on where we feel like we need that to be, but we want to do a little bit more math. One other point on there is this does not include the impact, the 15.5 per $10 doesn't include the impact. We pay out personal days at that rate also. So a change there would also change the personal rate, or the personal day buyback as well. I think that's a pretty minor cost, but it would make a change to that as well. A few things to point out in the legislative updates. 2284, we were expecting, we would have been very happy with the 3.5% and 3%. In conference committee, they made a recommendation for 4 and 4, so significantly more than what we anticipated, which is a good thing. We didn't see that coming. It didn't come up anywhere to be anywhere close to that until conference committee. So we're very thankful for our legislators to support that. Beyond that, we had discussion in a board retreat in the past about the cost of special education. That concern was heard as well, and to an increase to the multiplier for special ed, that weighted factor. And it doesn't seem like a lot to move to 0.082 to 0.088, but for us, it's about $140,000 annually. So it's a big shift. It doesn't seem like a lot when you just look at the factor, but it really is a fairly significant change. Another item that was placed into 2284 that was actually killed earlier, if you remember, that was 1491, was support for food service. And that amount, it wasn't the full, it's not universal, but it is for those families that are at 200% of the federal poverty level. So that was added back in. So beyond those that qualify for free and reduced lunch, there's another trigger that would be available for families in Jamestown if they don't reach that federal level qualifier, that they could still get support for free or reduced lunch. Another change that occurred is the 3 to 5 year demographic plan is now a May. So as a district, we could decide to complete that. We are no longer required for it, required to complete it, and that's something that would happen every other year. So it wouldn't be planned for this year anyway, but we could have a discussion about if we want to continue to do that, or if it would look somewhat different, if we want to do a standard of effort report, for example, every year instead of a 3 to 5 year plan. That would certainly be possible. There's a lot of studies, as is often the case, but TFFR and exemptions, virtual storm days, school transportation, the makeup of the State Board of Higher Ed, or I'm sorry, the State Board of Education. Were all studies, and then there was also funding for professional learning for science of reading and dyslexia training. So those were all placed into 2284. Very quickly, I want to draw your attention to 2015, which wasn't a bill that we talked about, but it included inflationary costs to our CTE grant, to all the CTE grants. So when we had a match grant, and that brought us about 1.6 million, because we did get some match from the city as well and some other areas, but that was expanded to account for inflationary costs. So now we're not talking about cutting to get to that, what can 1.6 million fund, and now we're looking at 2.1 million, and we think that that's going to allow us to continue to plan the initial scope of what we plan. So great news, and I know Mr. Gaylor worked with CTE and as well to make sure that perspective was heard on those inflationary costs. So with that, I do stand for question.
Any questions on Dr. Leck's superintendent report? I just want to comment, I appreciate you going back to the drawing board and coming back with a new recommendation for the continuous improvement director. I think that this is a nice happy medium. So I appreciate that. The more emergent need that I see is the ACOGNIA, our accreditation. Is depending on who we hire and their experience, is Mr. Hegland available for maybe some consultation? Because there's a lot to that program. I've seen it parts of it.
Well, and I have not talked to Mr. Hagelin directly, but considering that he has been half-time, full-time for quite a while, I would imagine he would be willing to help out.
Yeah, if need, like I said, that just being something that's emergent in the fall right away, and depending on the experience, is something I would like to throw out there for consideration for all, I guess. So, any other questions or comments about the report? Okay, the capital projects, we can also discuss that later if we need to. Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Leck. Moving on, nothing under old business. Under new business, nothing under activities. Under buildings and grounds, is there a motion for approval of updated capital projects plan? Motion by Dan, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval of the updated capital projects plan. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? Yes, Diane.
It's going to be kind of sad not to walk into the bathrooms and experience the 1960s again.
Well, we have more work to do, that's just those four, but yeah.
Making progress on those. Any other discussion, questions, or comments? Thank you for the facility committee's work on this as well. I like, it's very easy to understand where we're going with our plan, and I appreciate that work that they're doing. We have a motion and a second for approval of the updated capital projects plan as presented in the drive. There being no further discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Nothing under curriculum, assessment, instruction. Under finance, A, is there a motion for approval of the budget revisions? Motion by Diane, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval of budget revisions. Any discussion? Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no further discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. B, approval of the 2023 to 2024 support staff wage schedule. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa, second by Gail. We have a motion, a second for approval of the 2023 to 2024 support staff wage schedule. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no discussion, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. C, approval of the nursing agreement between Central Valley Health and Jamestown Public Schools for the 2023 to 2024 school year in the amount of $43,000. And is there a motion? Motion by Gail, second by Melissa. We have a motion, a second for approval of the nursing agreement between Central Valley Health and Jamestown Public Schools for the 2023 to 2024 school year in the amount of $43,000. Any discussion? Dr. Lick, this is the same, right? This is hold constant, okay? Any other discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Personnel. Under A, is there a motion for the central office staff recommendation as presented in the memo, the continuous improvement director? Motion by Melissa. Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second for the central office staff recommendation. Any discussion on this? Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. So we have 3 items here under B. Approval to hire for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon a successful background check, appropriate licensure, and with salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations. A, Brandon Beta, assistant principal at the high school, salary of $119,470. Rachel Rakoff, math teacher at the high school, salary of $45,207.77. Nathaniel Purcell, business teacher at the high school, salary of $47,090.38. Is there a motion? Motion by Aaron to approve. Is there a second? Second by Melissa. We have a motion and a second to approve the 3 hires for the 2023 to 2024 school year upon a successful background check, appropriate licensure, and with salary to be adjusted upon completion of negotiations. Any discussion? There being no discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved, and welcome to Jamestown Public Schools. For C, D, and E, If the board wishes, we can do a motion together. Approval of the resignation of Dr. Jennifer Jung, principal at Washington Elementary at the conclusion of the 2022 to 23 school year contract. Approval of the resignation of Madison Solway, English teacher at the high school at the conclusion of the summer school, June 30th, 2023. And approval of the resignation of Sarah McDermott, Spanish teacher at the high school at the conclusion of summer school, June 30th, 2023. Is there a motion? Motion by Melissa to approve C, D, and E. Is there a second? Second by Dan. We have a motion and a second to approve the resignation of C, D, and E. Any discussion? Any discussion? Okay. And Dr. Luck, with this approval, then we'll open these positions. And there is a principal position. Do you have some thoughts on that? We just hired another principal recently. Are we making any changes to that?
That's a great question. I would ask the board if they have direction on those positions. I know we've had discussion in the past, and the board has directed in the past to have a full-time principal at every building. I think attrition is always a time to have the conversation. It doesn't mean that, yes or no. It simply means, do we want to have that conversation? So in any case, if there is a resignation, my assumption is always to post, unless I'm given direction that now would be the time not to do that, or for me to consider other options as far as how to provide administration there.
Go ahead, Melissa.
I would like to see that this is posted as a position that is open, because as you've stated, yes, I think it's important that each building has its own principal. My question was, and I don't know what the legalities are on this, but since we did just have a position for a principal, is there anybody in that group that we can go back to, or does that have to be open as another?
We would post it. We would post the position again and reopen a search. If we did have, we would also look to who is in our current group of administrators. Is there somebody that we think could fill that position and then open up a different position? That's something that's, in my mind as far as how that might operate, continuing at the same FTE level. But again, I think there's always times where we should have, attrition is always a time to have a conversation about what should that look like. But whether that is the appropriate direction or not, I think it really comes to, from guidance with the board.
Gail.
Would it be possible, as if we were to make a decision here, that we could get feedback from Jennifer Young, who served in that position, and also the Washington staff as to what they think their needs are and how they would function without a full-time person in that building? I know, having worked in a number of buildings, the number of students in a building isn't always indicative of the needs of the building as well.
Yeah, I think, when we had this conversation 2 years ago or so, the staff had opinions on, concerns about not having a full-time person. I think you could certainly look at the close proximity of those two buildings. But again, those things don't always happen in the time frames people are there, even though the proximity to each other is pretty close.
Diane.
I'm just remembering those discussions 2 years ago. There was significant pushback from the community as well when we talked about splitting the principal's position. I'm not sure, Gail, that you were on board then, but okay, yeah, it just seemed like the community really wanted to do what Melissa's describing and keep a principal at each building. That doesn't mean that we have to do that, but I just wanted to remind you of that. And also, I had a question about the two teachers that are resigning. I see one of them, of course, is the foreign language Spanish teacher. I'm just wondering if you are concerned about, at this late date, finding someone to fill that role, or what the word is.
Well, I think, you say late date, and in a contract period, it isn't. It's actually pretty standard time. But I would be concerned if we knew about this in December. Positions in foreign language are very, very hard to find. And I know that there are a number of openings across the state in Spanish that'll make the position pretty challenging to fill. But we will do our best, just like we do in every search. And if we have to look to be creative, we'll find that creative solution there too. But that is an area absolutely that I have concern about.
So encourage people to apply if you know people, and even if for our community that's listening, there are some different alternative, if you have questions on how an alternative pathway would work, you can contact the high school, Adam Gaylor, and he can answer some of those questions. So if that's an area that you have some expertise in as well. Aaron.
Yeah, I'd be interested in some level of, strategic resource planning, looking at, principals, assistant principals, the whole, that group of administrative staff. And, if we just straightforward backfill this position, what are we looking at in terms of our, 3 to 5 year outlook on, that whole attrition and scenario?
Yeah, we started to look actually just earlier today at an administrative team meeting in terms of primary function, but also the portfolio assignments that all these individuals would hold, and starting to look at those. But I think there's some other connecting conversations that we're having as a district that could play into this decision as well. So I think we need to be mindful of that, and that there's an aspect of timing that is appropriate to that conversation that might lead into, this discussion at a later date. If I can talk around that enough.
And I also think that just by hiring this continuous improvement, then if we're down one other administrator, you're not really, it's probably not helping necessarily the situation. And so also the portfolios then would get moved on to other people, which would increase workload. So I agree with timing and maybe a little more planning.
Well, and with the portfolio assignments, one of the reasons why we added an HR generalist was to decrease those portfolio assignments from others. One of the reasons that we made a recommendation and or the board approved central office for that continuous improvement director is to alleviate some of that pressure that the building principals feel. And, without a different shift occurring, that could just exacerbate those portfolios again and have them grow, which was a problem we were trying to solve as well. I do think there's time for those conversations, though, at some point.
Any other discussion? I appreciate the board's discussion. I think, I agree with Dr. Luck, anytime you're having a change or a shift, it's a good time to pause and at least see where we're at and just some thoughts for moving forward as well. So I appreciate that discussion. So we have a motion and a second and some discussion on approval of the 3 resignations at the listed dates. Any other discussion? There being no further discussion, and we're approving C, D, and E. All those in favor, assuming roll call vote, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. 6, nothing under policy and procedures. 7, under tuition, A, and then we have 1 through 6. Is there a motion for approval of tuition agreements to attend Pingree Buchanan School for the 2023 to 2024 school year? And we have 1 through 6 pre-K tuition agreements. Is there a motion? Motion by Dan, second by Gail. We have a motion and a second for approval of tuition agreements to attend Pingree Buchanan Public School for the 2023 to 2024 school year, number 1 through 6 pre-K tuition agreements. Any discussion? Any discussion? There being no further discussion, assuming roll call vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. Number 8, other, nothing under other. Items for future agenda. Are there any items for future agenda that you would like to see? Any? Okay. If you think of something, please let Dr. Leck or myself know. Meetings to be scheduled. We have a school board meeting on Monday, May 15th, 2023 at 5:15 PM in the Thompson Community Room at the middle school. GED graduation on Tuesday, May 16th, 2023 at 7 PM at James Valley Career Tech Center. And thank you to Diane and Hanson and Jamie Bear who are attending that. We have transition program graduation on Thursday, May 18th at 11 AM at the Transition House. We have Melissa Gleason, Diane Hanson, Jason Rourke, Gail Nelson, and Jamie Bear attending that. And Health Insurance Committee meeting is on Monday, May 8th, 2023 at 3:45 PM in the District Conference Room. JPS High School graduation on Sunday, May 28th, 2023 at 2:30 PM at the Civic Center. We have Heidi Larson, Jason Rohr, and Dan Tweeten, and if anyone else would like to attend, make sure Amy is aware of that, and we can work on seating. There's also, not listed, but it's SEC is having a meeting on Wednesday, May 3rd at noon at their office location in Fargo. And I think we have scheduled recently a finance meeting, maybe? Okay. We're working on scheduling a finance meeting to be determined. Amy will have it posted once it gets scheduled. So. I forgot about that. Okay, once it gets scheduled. Yes, Diane.
I just wanted to commend whoever came up with the idea of putting the board members in on the different graduations. All these years, we've never done that, and it's very helpful, so thank you.
Yes, and thank you to those that are taking the time for those others, if you are, planning on attending and forgot to tell Amy, please let her know so she can be ready for those. Next item on our agenda is any other questions or meetings that we need, or questions on meetings? Okay. Next item on the agenda is possible executive session to discuss negotiations. Dan.
Discussions on negotiations and developing a strategy relative to the board's petition in this matter in open session would have an adverse fiscal effect on the position of board and district. Therefore, I moved the board enter into executive session, and that the following members and negotiators be identified as being present. School board members Diane Hanson, Melissa Gleason, Heidi Larson, Gail Nelson, Aaron Roberts, Dan Tweeten, Superintendent Rob Leck, and Business Manager Christy Grounds. The date and time are May 1st, 2023 at 6:10 PM. And that only the following topic will be considered in the executive session: negotiations strategies. That the legal authority for this executive session is section 44-04-19.1 of the North Dakota Century Code, and that the executive session be recorded.
We have a motion. Is there a second? Second by Aaron. We have a motion and a second. All those in favor, say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion approved. And remind them, sorry, Melissa.
I don't know what the proper procedure is for including people that are going into executive session. I
Yep.
said aye. then
Yep. Oh, sorry. I apologize there. Sorry. I was, there have been previous conflicts of interest that have been identified for this agenda item. And did you have a comment? And so, yeah, so if it just takes one board member to say that that conflict is a conflict, and then it would be amended.
So I state now that I feel
Yep.
like there's a
Yep.
conflict. I feel that there is a conflict with that.
Okay. Yep, and we don't need to vote on that, correct? So.
I was going to make the comment that it's different, and why school boards are different than other boards, I don't know, but that's what Century Code says. It is not a majority. It has to be unanimous if it deals with a contract. So if there is a vote in opposition to allowing a conflict to participate or vote, hold discussion In terms, if it deals with a conflict, then that is, that is the direction for the board. It has to be unanimous. It can't be a simple majority. Why school boards are that way and other boards are not, I do not know. But that is outlined in Century Code.
So we need a motion for that, and then that's, at this point.
I don't know if you need a separate motion to say that. I think you,
Okay.
I suppose,
So that you're that because of the, your,
well, there isn't a motion specifically to allow the conflict.
okay,
So, because normally in a conflict of interest, there's a declaration and then a motion that says specifically to overrule the conflict. And that will, I guess I would not declare or consider that to be, it was to move into executive session, not
Yep.
to
Yep.
change the conflict, the declaration of conflict.
Okay.
So I would not see that,
So-
although there were individuals listed in the motion.
Yep.
That was, the motion was really to go into executive session.
Okay.
I don't,
okay, yep. So the motion, we had a motion and a second, and an approval vote to go into executive session. So that is approved. There were conflicts that were identified early on with this continuous agenda item. And so I guess unless there is a motion and a second for those that declared the conflict to enter, to go into executive session for this agenda item, then those names would be removed from our list. So I don't think we need a second motion. I think you need a second motion. We don't need a second motion for the agenda, the executive session, no. I think if you want people to be part of the executive session that had declared the conflict, even though you read all the names, then we would need a separate motion for that. And then it would need an unanimous vote, yes. So that's where we would be sitting for that. So even though you read the names, the motion truly was to go into executive session. There were two names that had declared a conflict, and so and if those two names are allowed into executive session, we'd need a separate motion for that. That would be a separate motion, yes. And now would be in a time to do that before we. Yeah, separate motion to allow, right?
Correct.
Yep. To that you don't feel it would be.
To review the conflict
To review
of
the
interest.
conflict of interest, yes. So. And if there. Yep. So we're going to executive session because the motion was approved, okay? However, there were a couple names read in the list that had declared a conflict of interest. They technically would not be able to go into executive session without a motion allowing them to go because that you, basically you don't feel the conflict. Yes, Diane?
May I move that those that have declared a conflict of interest be allowed into executive session and
Okay.
to participate?
We have a motion. Is there a second? Mhm. We have a motion and a second to allow the conflicts of interest to be, participate, yep, in the executive session. And so there's a motion and a second, so we're going to do a roll call vote because we need an unanimous vote on this. So
Diane Hansen. Heidi Larson.
yes.
Gail Nelson. Dan Tweeten. Aaron Roberts. Melissa Melissa Gleason, sorry.
Aaron wouldn't vote though, would they? Yeah, I don't think Aaron would vote. Yeah, I don't think he would. Okay. And was that a no? Okay. All right. Since we need that motion and second failed because we needed a unanimous vote, so we will be entering into executive session. That motion was, just a reminder, backing up, that motion was approved. And all those will be present minus Aaron Roberts and Gail Nelson in this executive session. I also want to remind the board that once we are done with the executive session, that negotiation strategies will be the only topic discussed there. Once we're done, we return back here into this room to close out our regular meeting, okay?